My name is John here with Freedom Pharma, and today I want to talk about something that really none of us are paying any attention to, and that's called antimicrobial resistance. And you may have heard about it, but you probably just washed it off. It's not something that affects you directly right now, but I'm telling you, it's going to affect you for sure. As a matter of fact, the biggest problem we've got is bacterial infections. In all of our lifetimes, really since the Second World War, which includes virtually most of us. I was born after the Second World War, and I'm old. So really, since the Second World War, we've counted on antibiotics to take care of any bacterial infection we've had, and it's just been a sort of a non-issue. You get a bacterial infection, you get a prescription for an antibiotic, and away you go, you're fixed. Fantastic treatments, fantastic how it works. Basically, it's a rat killer for little teeny bacteria, and it works great. Biggest problem is you get a thing called resistance, and that's why it's called antimicrobial resistance. Resistance is where those bacteria, just like any living form, when it gets pounded by something, and let's face it, in this case it's antibiotics, they're going to do whatever they can to continue living. So you hit an antibiotic on a bacteria and it kills them. Almost all of them. One or two of them survive. And those ones, matter of fact, how a bacteria replicates, it just divides, it keeps going. So if your antibiotic treatment knocked out that whole mess of bacteria, except for one or two of them, those one or two keep going. And guess what? They're resistant. They are the survival of the fittest, basically, and they've outlasted that antibiotic. Those bacteria that are now resistant, they keep growing.
CDC's 2019 Antibiotic Resistance Threats Report shows that in the United States alone, 2.8 million antibiotic-resistant infections occur each year, and more than 35,000 people die. The nation's aggressive response to this threat has been effective. However, the threat continues, and more action is needed. The 18 resistant threats are listed based on 3 levels of concern to human health: concerning, serious, or urgent. The number of urgent pathogens increased from 3 in 2013 to 5 in 2019. The report also includes a list of 3 threats that have not emerged in the United States. CDC and other public health experts are monitoring them.
So really, until it comes down and hits you right in the face, that you've got a cut on your finger and the doctor's saying, well, we've got nothing to treat you with, it looks like you're going to die, you're thinking, what the? There's no way. But, and by the way, we haven't had a new category of antibiotics developed since the 1980s. And again, I'm old to the point where the 1980s, that's a long time ago still, and nothing new. So you think about all that time that the bacteria that have been hit with those antibiotics that we only last developed in the 1980s. Think about the mutations that they've gone through to protect themselves to be resistant. Unfortunately, now they're saying by 2050 that 10 million people in the world will die every year because there's not an antibiotic to treat them. So how do we offset this? Well, you'd think, well, the drug company should come up with new antibiotics. Ain't going to happen, and I'm going to tell you why. There's no money in antibiotics. In the last year, I actually had, and I rarely get infections, but I had an ear infection about a year ago now, and we're in the spring of 2024. The ear infection wasn't going away. I finally went in to the doctor. He prescribed an antibiotic for me. I went into the same place that I was actually seeing the doctor, got the antibiotic, took it. 5 days later, ear infection completely gone. In the last 3 months or so, I actually had a lung infection. It was, I think, bacterial pneumonia. Wasn't going away. I'd had it for like 3 months, wasn't disappearing, and I was hopeful that I could, combat it myself. Again, went to got a prescription, and within 7 days, that one was gone. Fantastic, it worked for me. Well, what happens when I go in for that same lung infection 10 years from now? The guy gives me the same antibiotic, and guess what? The bugs now have mutated to the point where they're not affected by that antibiotic. Well, we're going to try this other antibiotic. It might work. Well, guess what? It didn't work either. And so here's the problem with developing new antibiotics. Because of resistance, what they do with any new drug that's been approved, they hold it in reserve. In other words, let's try these first antibiotics that we know work for the time being, and if they don't work, we've got Joe Blow's company's antibiotic over here that we've been holding, that it might work, and probably will because it's new, but there hasn't been any new ones for over 40 years. Anyway, that's not much of an incentive for a company to build a new antibiotic because it's held in in reserve, not to be used. Ridiculous, so nobody's going to build on that. The other problem is those 2 antibiotics that I took over the last year, I think in total they cost $60. Now, let's face it, the drug companies that are developing drugs right now are going to say, well, do we want to invest in treatments that are going to give us a $60 payback? Matter of fact, the average treatment now being approved by the FDA, $115,000 per year per patient. A far cry from $60. And by the way, that $115,000 is expected to be taken by that patient virtually until they die. So let's face it, drug companies are incentivized by money, which is what all companies are incentivized by. Doesn't matter even what industry. They're going to develop drugs that pay them back. And antibiotics don't fit in that category. Anyway, so now, what are the alternatives? How do we come up with alternatives? Well, the biggest problem is that nobody's worrying about it right now. And the people that should be worrying about it are you, because you're the one in a couple of years is going to get that cut on your finger, get a bacterial infection, and the doctor says, well, sorry about that, we've got nothing to treat with. You're probably going to live for another 6 days before it spreads to your body and you're going to die. Kind of a bad prognosis. So in other words, people, governments, which are people, have to come up with a way of incentivizing companies like ours, for example. We have a treatment for C. difficile infection, which is a bacterial infection in the gut, to bring those drugs to market. They're novel, they're new. As a matter of fact, in our case, we're not even going to be affected by bacterial resistance because we're antibodies. It's not even an antibiotic, it's an antimicrobial, but not a biochemical. So you don't get the resistance that you have with typical antibiotics. Anyway, the general population that are going to be hit with this thing in the near future have got to talk about it a lot about, hey, what about AMR? Is anybody thinking about this? Or are we waiting until the last minute when all of a sudden people that we know, friends, family, ourselves for that matter, are starting to die because of stupid little bacterial infections? No, now's the time to talk about it, because you're not going to warp speed an antibiotic or an antimicrobial the way they tried to do with COVID. It's not going to happen, and it didn't really happen then either. And what we're doing for antimicrobial resistance is we make antibodies. Not exactly antibiotics, antibodies. Matter of fact, that's the natural way mankind has taken care of themselves since the dawn of mankind. Basically, we produce antibodies that knock out pathogens. We make antibodies from an external source and make them available for you. And if you want to help our cause to try to fight off this AMR that we've been talking about, we have a product called GutFix, Gutfyx. Matter of fact, if you go on our website, GutFix yourself. Thanks for listening.